Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. I I've been contemplating recently and I feel like there are a lot of really popular books on booktube, bookstagram, book talk that I've read and I haven't enjoyed. Really popular books that I have never really spoken about on this channel because I just haven't loved them. So I've just kept my cards close to my chest. However, I don't feel like these books, any of them, are bad books objectively, and obviously they're not, because there are so many people out there who really love them. It's one of two things. It's either that my expectations of them were different or too high for what I ended up getting, or simply it didn't mesh with my style. So whether it's the writing style or whether it's the way that the plot was structured, those things just didn't mesh with my personal preference and my personal style. But that doesn't make it a bad book. So let's jump right into it because I think this might be a long one. We're starting off hot with The Invisible Life of Addie Larue. Am I terrified to talk about this book? Yes. I know this is everybody's absolute favorite book of all time, God tier book. I know, I get it. And honestly, it took me a really long time to read this because I feel like the way that people made it seem like it was truly like transcending the game. I always get scared to give in to the hype and to give in to like these really high expectations for books, because then I just feel like ultimately I'll be disappointed. And unfortunately, that is what happened in this book. I'm not going to talk about the synopsis of any of these books because obviously they are incredibly popular books. What I will say is what I was expecting from it. So honestly, I got this recommendation from everywhere, from Bookstagram, Book Talk, Booktube. Like this one really made its rounds everywhere. And from the reviews that I was hearing, honestly, I was expecting heartbreak. I was expecting some really cool magical realism and an interesting way to play with time and immortality. I also expected great writing. I know a lot of people say that the writing is really great in it, even though it is very slow. And I was like more than everything, I was expecting a really incredible and epic love story. Even if it was tragic, I could have been fine with it. But I wanted like a love story to really gut me, if you know what I mean. So the reality, in my opinion, was that this one felt really slow and boring. And while we did get a love story, I didn't find it compelling or really epic in any way. I thought it was sweet, and I think it's just that, you know, if there is this one person who remembers her after all of these centuries of nobody ever remembering her or knowing her, I feel like automatically there would be like this curiosity and this love that would blossom. It felt automatic rather than intentional. I never really bought into the love that was shared between this couple. And I also, there was a twist at the end in terms of the romance, and that really threw me off. I was so confused by it. I don't know, I wasn't compelled by her character, so following her for such a long time felt mind numbing almost. So I don't know, I think this one came down to, and I think a lot of these come down to connection with the story and with the characters. I feel like if I'm not connected to the storyline and the characters and what's happening to them in their life, a story can't like work for me. So maybe it's that, but also I didn't connect with the plot of this one. I didn't connect with the romance. I didn't connect with the narrative style. I just felt like it could have been a little more efficient. This is a really long book, and I still don't feel like I got what I wanted from it. So, needless to say, obviously that's just my opinion, and so many people out there really love this book, and this is like their favorite book of all time. So it's it's not to say that I don't recommend this book for that reason. That's just the reason I didn't like it. However, I do think that there are certain readers who could really resonate with the story. I think if you love the idea of following this woman who, you know, values her freedom and her independence above all, especially in such a historical setting, I think it's always really refreshing to see a woman go out on her own and kind of take life by the reins and kind of take control of her narrative and her fate. I appreciated that. And I think that if that's something that you really resonate with really closely, you could appreciate her story. And the fact that, you know, unfortunately asking for things and making deals with the devil does have consequences, and it is heartbreaking to follow these consequences and see where they take her. I think that at the bottom line and kind of the message, at least of the first half of the story, was that Addie just wants to be Addie. Like, she just wants to be free. She wants to travel. She wants to experience art and life. And she doesn't want to be somebody's wife, especially not against her will. So I think that if that's something that feels close to home, I think you could appreciate her journey. If you love like omnipresent characters or like dark forces that are, I guess, kind of complex, I think you could also appreciate the direction that the story took. If you're like me and you didn't appreciate it as much as everybody else on the internet has, I do have an alternative for you. I know that this one is also pretty popular, but I feel like what I was looking for in this is kind of what I got from this next book. This book is one of my all-time favorite books, Lovely War by Julie Berry. I can't talk enough about this, and I have talked about this book at length in many videos, but this one I think gave me what I was expecting from Addie Larue, which is that magical voice and magical narrative style, with the Greek gods being the narrators of the story. It was also heartbreaking and historical, and it gave you that like epic, true, deep love story that, you know, persists against all odds. That's kind of what I was expecting from Addie LaRue, and I feel like I got this in droves in this book. I just loved everything about it. I loved the setting. I loved the historical backdrop. I loved the characters and their love, and I loved the narrative style and the way that we did have like this kind of omnipresent narrator or this omnipresent character in Aphrodite and some of the Greek gods who were like telling our characters a story for them, but it was done just so well in here, and I can't recommend The Lovely War enough. Next we have The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. Where's my copy of that? I am like 95% sure that I gave it to my younger brother to give to one of his little crushes, and it's just gone. So it is what it is. I didn't like it anyway, but this one I read quite a while ago. I think I read this one back in maybe 2021 or 2022. This one is like an OG booktube veteran. For me, I expected this one to be really setting driven. Of course, I thought that it was going to be a very magical, mysterious setting, and I was in for that. I also thought that it was going to be like a love story with two opposing forces that was just like you can't help but fall for each other even though you know you shouldn't, almost like a forbidden love, but an epic one. Honestly, in any kind of story, I'm looking for epic love, you know? So maybe that's my fault. I was also expecting a plot that had a lot of twists and turns. Like, I expected to be on the edge of my seat with regards to the games that were being played and these magical showcases, I guess, that was going on. It was supposed to be like this years long magical game between these two characters. And in reality, I felt like I didn't get that. And I think that was my biggest complaint because I really, really loved the first half of this book. I loved the setting and the setup of the world and where the characters are and their individual training and basically setting up for this fate that they are going to be at odds with each other. They're going to be fighting against each other for this thing. And ultimately they're going to fall in love and they won't be able to be together, you know? I just felt like to keep it short and sweet because I'm not trying to dissuade you from reading these books. I just felt like the plot and the romance lacked the depth and stakes that I was expecting from the synopsis that I'd read and from the book reviews that I had heard. So it's not to say that the book itself can't be enjoyable, and I actually did enjoy quite a lot of it. I just think that it was an unsatisfying ending for the story that I was expecting. I do think though that if you love almost abstract fantasy and magic and just circuses in general, circus stories in general, I think that you could really, really appreciate the story, especially the setting. Honestly, this is one of the best written settings that I have ever read. And I would recommend it for that only. But I'm talking about like if you really want this to be a 5-star read, I think you have to go in with the expectation of wanting more of a whimsical time rather than a high stakes, competitive time. If you appreciate tension over action when it comes to fantasy stories, I think you could also really appreciate this because it's not that they didn't compete and it's not that it was satisfying in that way, but I felt like what the competition actually entailed was not as exciting or high stakes or action packed as I expected it to be. If you could appreciate a subtle love story, like sprinkles of it, rather than a true romance subplot where the characters are really like falling in love. I think in this book there's some yearning and there's some curiosity and rivalry, but I don't know if it's true love that happened. And I think that if you go into it with the right expectations, you could get a really enjoyable experience out of it, you know? Incredibly magical and mysterious setting, meant to be opposing forces who fall in love and twists and turns. For spoiler reasons, I don't want to talk too much about this and why it gave me everything that I was looking for in the Night Circus. But this one, I just thought was so perfectly fantastical. I felt completely transported to the world. I loved the writing. It was so lyrical and beautiful and descriptive, but not overly descriptive. It felt like just enough to immerse you into this world, into this magical land, and appreciate these characters and connect with them without being too much. I just highly recommend this one overall. But I think that if you're like me and you didn't really love the Night Circus, like if it didn't work for you entirely and if it was kind of unsatisfying in plot and romance, you'll get it from here. Okay, we're breaking it up a little bit and throwing in a bit of romance. You With a View by Jessica Joyce. I read this one this year actually, and I had such high hopes for it, to be honest. I don't know. This one kind of hit because I thought it was going to be like a fun rom-com, which it was. Okay, let me just tell you my expectations. I expected this one to be fun and adventurous and really, really funny and lighthearted. Even though I know that this one followed grief, I thought that it would be a little bit more lighthearted in the moments where we weren't talking about grief, but I just didn't find this one funny at all. I don't think the attempts at comedy worked for my personal preference, and I didn't believe the romance. I didn't believe that these characters were really in love. I think this suffered, in my opinion, from two hot people in proximity because they were on this road trip together and they were kind of connected by the main male character's grandfather. And so I think that they were in proximity to each other and they knew each other prior. It's a second chance romance. And they kind of knew bits and pieces of each other. So I think that that could easily be confused with love. but I don't know if I really believed in their love in this book. It never really sold me on it. However, I think you could appreciate this if you really, really like just a really steamy, entertaining, I guess, back and forth kind of dynamic. Like they were always making nudges at each other and poking fun and kind of flirting, but also kind of like hating each other in moments. I don't think it was ever true hate, but yeah, I think it was an interesting dynamic, and I think if you just want to literally just sit and binge a book on the beach, I think it could work. I just if you have gone through grief and if you can kind of resonate with the grief that is being talked about in this book, I could see how you could appreciate some of the conversations that I had about it and about moving forward and about, still being able to have a fun and exciting time and how to honor somebody's memory while still grieving them. I think that it could be beneficial and it could be kind of therapeutic to read if you're going through something like that. But yeah, that's You with a View by Jessica Joyce. Some alternatives if you didn't really love this one and if it didn't really work for you. I have The Italian Job by Catherine Freeman. This one is like my underrated banger. I don't know how everybody isn't talking about this book and how everybody doesn't love it. I just thought it was so cute. These are two childhood like rivals. They were neighbors and they never really got along with each other until both of them end up working together in this Italian castle. It is so good. This is banter and chemistry to its finest. I also think that the surrounding characters or the supporting characters in the story was so cute and endearing. It just felt like they were immersed in this world where they had to fall in love, Like it almost felt like fate that they were both available to be at this place at the same time rather than they were just in proximity to each other, if that makes sense. I think there's a distinction, even if I can't articulate it. But yeah, I think that they needed that time to really get to know each other, and that they did. I feel like they really came to understand each other and they paid so much close attention and they really took care of each other in really valuable ways throughout the story. The chemistry was smoldering and there's also spice in this. So I'm not saying that, you know, that book was too spicy and I couldn't love it. I gave this 6 stars. This is one of my favorite romance books ever. And I think that I could appreciate it if it is like against the backdrop of a really, really tense, chemistry filled, care filled romance story. So, yeah, I highly, highly recommend this one. This one is a pretty popular one, but I also recommend The Paradise Problem. I think that this one also kind of gives some of the same vibes as You with a View, where they're at a different location. It's not, I don't have any. Yeah, I have one story where they hit multiple places, but in this one, it's really between home and this like private island where our female main character is meeting the entire family of our main male character, and it's fun. Like it's tropical, as it says in the title. It's paradise, and I think that setting kind of correlates with like adventure. I also think it was really funny. There was some spice in this book, and I just thought that the characters' dynamics was so funny. This one is definitely the funniest one of the three alternative books that I have to recommend. So, yeah. And then last but not least, we have this is the UK edition, I think, but People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. I need I say more? I feel like literally everybody knows what this book is about and kind of why it may be comparable to You with a View. In this story, we have Poppy and Alex who are best friends and they are traveling the world together for many, many years until something happens and they don't talk for a couple years and then they have to make amends and kind of figure out where they go from there. So, yeah, this one I think also has the benefit of a pre-established relationship and travel and going different places and seeing different places together. And This one isn't really spicy. I think this is the least spicy of my recommendations. However, the tension is great and the banter is really, really good. I think this one is Friends to Lovers done perfectly. Perfectly. Then we have Piranesi, which I read last year, I want to say. And as with most of these books, I did not hate it whatsoever. I actually really enjoyed it. I want to say I enjoyed 75% of this book. However, I thought that the where it lost points for me, I'll say, is in the plot. I thought that it was going to be a bit bigger. I don't want to spoil this one. I know a lot of people say to go into this blind, so I don't even really want to talk about what I didn't like about the book. But what I will say is that a lot of people say that the ending is just so incredible, and the my expectations for the ending were a little bit more outlandish and otherworldly than what we ended up getting. It kind of went a little bit more of a literary direction than I was expecting. So I'll leave it at that. However, I do think that this book could, and not could, I know for a fact that so many people love this book so desperately. And I think that if you love like a slow burn or a slow unraveling of a plot, you could really appreciate that. I thought that we were going to go just in a completely different direction. And I think that's where some of my disappointment came from because I felt like I could completely follow and see like at least two chapters ahead where we were about to go with the story. And I almost wanted it to be more of a gotcha situation, which is no credit against the book. I just think that I wanted it to go in a different direction or I was expecting a different thing. However, I really, really did enjoy this. I loved our main character, Pernasi. And I don't know. I think maybe if I reread this, I could appreciate it a lot more. I think out of all of the books that I am talking about today, I think this one is the one that I disliked the least by far. And I really think that I could appreciate it if I had different expectations for it. So that's kind of what I'm trying to help with today. I think that you could really appreciate it if you love a dreamy, dream-like, fantastical situation, if you love descriptive and lyrical writings of settings specifically, the setting writing in this book was crazy. It was so good and immersive. And I don't know, I could literally picture it in my head still. I also think if you love kind of a questionable protagonist or a questionable character in general, where you're not really sure who you're rooting for, who you're rooting against. You're not sure. You know that somebody's evil, but you don't know quite how and what their motive is. I think in terms of mystery, the first half of this book is a masterclass. The way that it was written, I just think that I always have a really hard time with mysteries and how they are wrapped up at the end. And I think the mystery plot of the story is what took marks away, but the fantastical element of it was amazing, if that makes sense. Also, if you love uncomfortable situations and just this impending feeling of doom, this is the book for you. Okay, and I have two alternatives. One is an honorable mention. Okay, my camera overheated and died. However, we literally just have two books to talk about. My alternatives to Piranesi. So let's get into those. The first one is Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. Unfortunately, I'll never stop talking about this book, to be honest. It's so good. And I think that it did that kind of obscure plot where you kind of have no idea what's going on until the very end, where things kind of tie together really nicely and it makes you kind of rethink the entire book rather than like a slowly progressive development of the plot where you kind of understand the next step and the next step while you're reading the book instead of like having to go back and think, oh my God, that makes so much sense now. That makes sense. Everything is tied together now. I feel like that's what I was expecting from Piranesi, and I got it in this, and it was just so good. This book has it hasn't been able to leave my mind since. And the last one is actually not on my physical shelf. I've never had it, but it's the Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz. Carlos Ruiz Zafon. And the only reason that I bring this one up, it is an honorable mention rather than like a true alternative. But I bring this one up because I feel like it's more historical and literary than it is fantastical. However, I think that the way that it deals with narrative versus truth is similar, and I think it's really well done in both books, but I think it's done better in Shadow of the Wind, where in that book there is a story that is central to the plot. However, while you're reading it, you have no idea what's fact and fiction. It seems like the story is almost foretelling a lot of things that are happening in like the actual story. In Piranesi, it's not a book that is kind of starting to mirror real life as it is in Shadow of the Wind, but in Piranesi, it's a diary that our main character has been keeping, and he is very meticulous with it. He is documenting every single day of his life, and we slowly start to see through the diary entries kind of the unraveling of that situation that he's in and how he got there, and he kind of figures things out slowly but surely, and he figures out who the villain is and stuff like that through the story that he wrote himself, if that makes sense. And I don't know. I don't want to spoil too much about either of the books, but I think that that kind of narrative where there's a story unfolding within the story is similar and done really well in both books, in my opinion. So that is the last book that I have for today. I really hope that you enjoyed not just this concept and the video, but I hope that you'll pick up some of these books and enjoy them. Even the ones that I didn't love, I hope that I've done a decent enough job at kind of convincing you to read it if it's something that might be up your alley more so than mine. And yeah, I just hope that I was able to bring some kind of positive reinforcement to these books, because I feel like I've kind of even started changing my mind a little bit and giving some of these books a bit more credit as I've gone through my thoughts and reviews and stuff like that. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye.